can start with.
Yeah, we can start with that. Okay.
We can do an intro first.
Well, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to San Francisco. Delightful to have everyone here. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to San Francisco. We're delighted to see everybody in person again, and to our colleagues who are participating remotely, welcome as well. We will be monitoring your comments on the chat to keep you actively engaged. My name is Ray Osaragamo. I'm the PI for the Baptist Mid-South MU-NCORP, and my colleague here.
Yeah, so I'm Dawn Hirschman. I'm the vice chair for the SWOG-NCORP research base, and I'm also at an MU-NCORP, which is Columbia. Yeah, so welcome to the meeting. I think maybe we start with the presentations, and then we had a few topics that we wanted to discuss and get feedback from everybody. But just to open us off, because we're always thinking about the next grant, we have Dr. Parker, who's here, that's going to give us a brief overview in terms of the NCORP renewal applications. So thank you so much, Dr. Parker. I think I have to.
This works. Oh, yep. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Oh, goodness gracious. I'm going to raise this up here. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session. Thank you all, I have to say, as the NCORP, as the DCP program director or project scientist. I want to thank all of you for all of the work that you all have been doing over the past year, and indeed during the COVID pandemic. It's just amazing what you've achieved. And so I just want to give you my personal thank you to all of you. Those of you that are out there in the that are video, well, I guess, what is it? Zoom. Yeah. Also, thanks to all of you for the efforts that you do. I also want to wish a happy birthday to Ray for yesterday. So yes, sing, but you're still a young man, though. So anyway, I brought a little presentation, but this says keep it quick. That's all this says. So so we'll just go to the first slide. So basically, the program evaluation questions here were composed, I guess, by an external panel, some external panel that wanted to get these salient questions posed to all of you, as well as to the research bases. So we can get, so from these questions, then they can, this will help them in terms of guidance for preparing for the next for the renewal grant. So first, of course, is the NCORP of sufficient value to recommend that NCI proceeds with consideration of recompeting the program. And then the second is, are there any major recommendations that the NCI should consider to improve the conduct and impact of the research within NCORP? Regrettably, I'm not able to share internal issues right now. We're still in that internal process, but if we could slip to the next slide. So we've just completed, it says there, April 2023, the initiation of this evaluation committee and data dissemination. We're now in the May-June phase with the panel meetings, and this will be followed by, as you see, the executive committee presentation, followed by the board of scientific advisors. So it's hopeful that the FOA will be out in December of 2023, notice of intent to publish, followed by publication in the NIH guide, and then applications to be received in late September to October, with award dates finally in August 1st of 2025. That's all I have to say. I promised to keep it short. And are there any questions? But everything's internal, so I can't share anything. So.
If you have any questions, that's great, but he can't answer any.
Yeah. I have a question.
Oh, no.
So the first slide, the two questions there, who are they directed at? Will they be coming to us for direct feedback, or who are those questions going to be?
So those questions had already been asked to research-based leaders as well as to MU-NCORP sites. So these questions had already been posed in groups based upon who was who was the program director for each group of, say, 7 or 8 of these MU-NCORP, of the community MU-NCORP sites. So these had already been posed, and we have answers for those.
You have the answers?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So they're looking at both the research bases as well as the community sites. So the whole thing. Yeah, the big P.
Yeah. The same happened on the NCTN side.
So will the BSA, will the answers to these questions be part of what comes to the Board of Scientific
Yeah,
Advisors?
there'll be a report from the evaluation panel.
Dr. Bernard, I have just one question, and this is, I don't want specific answers, but I noticed in the budget justification that was sent to Congress that in here, it says doubling accruals to cancer clinical trials. Could you just at a high level talk about that a bit?
Well, that's a good question, Lucy, and regrettably, I hesitate in terms of answering that question, but no, I do appreciate your asking that, but I think that it may be premature for me to give any answers right now.
So yeah, doubling that as a priority does not necessarily mean that they're doubling the budgets for each of the MU-NCORP.
The wish list that we put them to Congress, if they choose to give us the money to do this, this would be our.
Excellent.
Okay.
Any other questions? Because,
Any questions online?
oh,
Yep.
there are no questions online.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Kate Castro, who is with the CCDR team, and she has her slides.
Vertically challenged.
Sorry.
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not going to be talking about money. I want to make sure that everybody is aware of the dates and has these on their calendar for the 2023 MU-NCORP annual meeting. And this meeting will be taking place the end of August. It's a 3-day meeting because, you know, every other year, Marge Good leads for us the administrator session, which is going to take place on Wednesday, August 23rd. This is an in-person only meeting and it's limited to administrators. We're really looking forward to this. Marge has an incredible agenda already drafted for this. And I know we have a lot of new administrators at some of the sites. And so it's an opportunity for everybody to come together and get to spend some time together on that Wednesday. Then the main meeting that everyone is invited to attend is going to be all day on Thursday, August 24th from 8:30 to 5, and the morning of Friday, August 25th. And again, in person on the NIH campus at the Natcher Auditorium, where we've been in years past before the pandemic. And we also are going to have for the main meeting a streaming option for that. So if you have staff that are not able to attend in person and you would like for them to attend a session or all of the meeting, you could do that through virtual streaming. It is not going to be interactive. I call it the C-SPAN version. So they will be able to listen and hear all the speakers, but there won't be, you know, interaction with chat and that sort of thing. At the present time, we are limiting attendance to 5 in-person attendees per grantee. If your grant site would like to have more than 5 people attend, please reach out to us at the General MU-NCORP website and indicate your interest in bringing more than 5 attendees, because if there are sites that aren't able to bring 5, we will then replace that with, you know, let you bring more. So please just reach out to that General MU-NCORP mailbox that you send information to. Registration is going to open on June 12th, and we'll be sending out hotel information and all of that as we get ready for the registration. One other change this year, and this does relate it to money because of how contracts are now being required by the hotels since the pandemic. we are not able to do a hotel block. So we have not secured a specific hotel block on the meeting registration website. There will be a list of multiple hotels that you can choose from, but unfortunately, just they were requiring that we had to enter a contract that we weren't going to be able to do. So we are not going to have a hotel block this year. Dr. Berenberg, yeah. So this is on the these hotels will be on the Metro line, so that will be available for you. And also there will be information regarding some of the hotels provide shuttle service up to the Gateway Center at, which is where you go through security. So that will be on the information. There will not be a specific party bus for the NCORP annual meeting. If that's what you're asking about, we won't be having one of those. I know, budget cuts. There we go. I am talking money, aren't I? The second thing I wanted to highlight is work that's being done in our disparities integration emphasis group. And that you've heard from this group over all the years here, and they have these really three key pillars of the work that they're doing with the activities. Today, I want to highlight the resource matrix work that's going on, and just talk to you about a survey which you recently received at your NCORPs. So the resource matrix really has an aim to create a repository of disparities focused resources to understand what expertise grantees have and other assets that they have. This is for both the research bases and the sites. So again, the program as a whole with a capital P. And the group is interested in eliciting feedback to better understand what resources are available at the sites and the bases, and then could understand how these resources could contribute to the overall goals of the disparities integration emphasis group. So this survey was sent out a few weeks back. Sarah, I can't remember. At the end of April, and we quickly got feedback that reminded us that it's progress report season. So could we not ask for the survey to come back at the same time as the progress reports? So due date is June 16th for this. So y'all can get your progress reports done, and then would greatly appreciate if people would give time to this. You can see here the objectives. I'm not going to read through all of them, but it is incredibly important. And this group has done a lot of work. They've tested the survey. They've really, looked at all the opportunities for people to be able to give information. You do not need to send the information at this time. It's just asking you what you have available at your sites, and understanding really what are the gaps, what are the expertise available, and what are these resources. And this last slide just gives you some examples of the types of resources that you might comment on, and certainly you all are welcome to share these slides along the way. So hopefully everybody received this survey. We call it the RRI survey, and you're working on, once you get your progress report all set, you're working on bringing that in. And always a gentle reminder for progress report season that you are required to submit a cancer care delivery research budget in addition to, along with your main budget. So please let us know if you have any questions as you prepare that.
Does anybody have any questions?
Any online? Any chat questions? Please feel free to enter comments, questions in the chat. Thank you, Kate. All right, so we're getting into that cycle. The new grant cycle, I'm sure, is beginning to percolate upwards in people's minds. As we learn, we will be glad to share. I think we essentially had to torture Dr. Parker to give us the little information that he gave today. His first response was, no, I can't share anything, but he was very gracious. A few hours later, he sent this slide. So thank you, Bernard. Appreciate you. Okay, well.
So I think to start, we've started a couple of other meetings this way. As you heard during the plenary, there's going to likely be a change to the structure of the SWOG group chair, and having it be two co-chairs as opposed to a single chair. And, we wanted to open it up to any of you who may have any questions or concerns about the change in structure, or what that might mean for the NCORP, or any other administrative issues. So we wanted to open up the mics to make sure that we listen to everybody here, to make sure that if you have any questions or concerns about it, that we address them.
So maybe I could, by way of background, first of all, let's just make sure we're not talking over people's heads here. So we know that we're due to have a change in our group chair. Chuck Blanky is serving the tail end of his final term. And the idea was to bring in the replacement group chair early enough to be involved in writing the next grant and to have some overlap with Chuck. So a nominations committee was impaneled. I happen to be a member. We came up with we had 4 candidates who put their hat in the ring. And we found 2 who were exceptional, and they both happened to be members, longstanding members of SWOG. We actually made a concerted effort to diversify the candidate pool, including encouraging people outside SWOG to apply. And in the process of vetting the candidates, we had all these elaborate plans to meet in person. We had taken all the input from them and so on and so forth, and decided that we would present those 2 candidates for a vote at this meeting. And somewhere before then came the idea, with these 2 very strong candidates, did we have to do either or could we do both? And we happen to have candidates who were very strong, but also very complementary. One candidate deeply immersed in MU-NCORP and everything to do with it. The other candidate super integrated in the NCTN side of things. And so in the end, there was the agreement that we could modify our bylaws to allow the possibility of shared group chair positions. And that was voted on, accepted, and I think Dr. Blanky communicated that. So tonight in the Board of Governors meeting, we're actually going to look and make the final decision on this. We'd love to hear. This is essentially a fait accompli. Want to hear what people think about this structural change. From 1 person, which is what we have traditionally had, to now 2 people. Thoughts, concerns, questions? For full disclosure, of course, one of the candidates happens to be sitting beside me here, so maybe that's why everybody's being quiet, but yeah.
But I have thick skin, so.
I can say that I've seen it work really well in another research base. And I think there's very different focus from the MU-NCORP site than there is from the CTN, as there is from LAPS and MU-NCORP sites. So I think it will benefit both sides. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Please, feedback, input. We still have the meeting. It's a few hours away. Speak now or forever hold thy peace, I guess.
Is there
If-
any
if
mechanism
you-
for conflict resolution?
If you don't go to the microphone, then nobody online can hear you. But I can repeat the question, but it's better if you do it yourself.
Nothing from.
Personally, I agree with what Lucy said, but I was just wondering, is there any mechanism for conflict resolution? I know on certain multi-PI grants, usually that's built in, but was that discussion held, and can you comment on that? Thank you.
Yes, so the question was about conflict resolution. I don't know, Ray, if you want to answer that. I can answer it as well. I think that a lot of that is, we will spell out in the grant like you would for an MPI plan. And, I think that we don't anticipate there being any conflict, but you never know. At the end of the day, I think the plan right now is that any issues that come up will go to the board for a vote. And so we will spell out every possible potential problem that can come up. And that's why these kind of conversations are good, because people have ideas that we may not have thought about. And as Dr. Blanke said, the grant is not due, the change in GARD is in 2025, and the grants the reason we're doing this now is because we're starting to talk about the grants now, and putting all of this into the grants is going to be really critically important. And so we have many months to work out all of these details, to reassure people if there's anything that you're concerned about, that we address ahead of time so that we can spell it out in the grants.
Speaking of grants, just for synchronization, I guess I think about trying to get new contracts at a local level, which is a nightmare. Will the grants follow the new PIs? And if so, do they go one to the institution for the MU-NCORP, one to the institution for the NCTN? And will they synchronize well? Because that causes lots of headaches on our end. And I guess my question would be, since there's going to be a movement, could there be a more centralized way to facilitate, like maybe the foundation being the holder of the grant, so we don't have the disruptions over the years?
You hit on just about every discussion we've had. So it's really important, I think, for a variety of reasons. I think it's hard to have the grant go directly through the foundation. But we are working on part of this next 6 months is going to be to try to figure out how to centralize a lot of the functions that have been done at the institutional level. So some of the functions that have, may have been done by OHSU in the past may be done by the Hope Foundation in the future, so that we can harmonize some of the functions from different institutions through the Hope Foundation. From a regulatory perspective, I think there's some advantages to having the grant sit from a contracting and oversight perspective through an academic institution, but there are lots of ways we can try to have then the funds for some activities go centrally, so that the staff, there's not as much staff and contracting turnover in the future. That kind of feedback is really important, and any issues you'd had in the past with contracts would be good to bring up, so that as we have this opportunity to try to resolve some of that, by trying to figure exactly what can sit like in the Hope Foundation and exactly what will still need to fit in the at the institutional level.
But there'll be still an operation.
Yes, all of that is exactly this. None of that is going to change. And I think the hope with some of this going through the Hope Foundation is that there's staff that's very, and this happened the last time where there was staff at Michigan that stayed at Michigan, but then they ended up going, even though they lived in Michigan, they were faculty on OHSU, or they were hired by OHSU, and so I think as opposed to trying to deal with all of that change and contracting issue, if we can try to figure out the core that's going to be central, and try to have we can't put too much on the Hope Foundation all at once from a staffing perspective, and think about the staff that we currently have that are all well trained, that could then go on to the Hope Foundation and try to work out those details. I think that's what we're thinking. I mean, the devil's in the details, but hearing from the sites, and especially hearing what issues have come up or came up during the last transition, would be really helpful, because we want to try to simplify things, not make them more complicated if possible.
Yeah, and I can tell you the foundation is very willing to do whatever to help. Joe Horn and her team are pretty good and pretty receptive to whatever it is that we define as the optimal.
Well, I think that the way it's been is that we kept the indirect rates significantly lower than the institutional rates, and that's negotiated ahead of time because otherwise it would be impossible. So I think they've been maintained low, but yeah, also to make sure that more of the funding, to be quite honest, goes to where it should go as opposed to, exactly. So we're very conscious of those issues, and it would be a mistake to say that nobody wants to think about it until it's like official. So, but we have thought about it.
So there are probably two things to emphasize for context, okay? One is that although SWOG has no prior experience with this, other research bases do have that experience. Recall that we didn't have to consolidate by partnering with anybody else, but most of the other groups did. And the way NCI worked that out was dual leadership for most of them. And that model has been tried and tested. And I think overall, nothing appeared in the cancer letter. So, so presumably it's worked well. The other thing I will also point out is that the way we modified the bylaws was it opened up the possibility of this model, but it didn't legislate it as the sole option. So there's always the option of, so when there's another cycle, candidates will be invited to come forward in pairs or singles, whichever they prefer. So there is, what we've done is created flexibility to do it the way we've done it before, or if it made sense to do it the way we're doing it now. So just so people understand that we haven't backed ourselves up into a corner, and there is precedence for this. Wow, everybody seems to be
I know.
cool with this. Okay, good. All right.
Well, if at any time any questions come up, I encourage everybody here or online to reach out because, as I said, as we start to think about some of the mechanics of these processes and what we can do to facilitate any administrative issues that have come up in the past, this is an opportunity to do that.
And by the way, the other person here is Lucky Lara. I think most people know Lucky. He has been in the loan committee and the GU committee for many years, and has served as SWOG's deputy for quite a period of time. Okay, all right. Well, so we can go to new business. Anybody with pressing matters, questions, issues that they want addressed. We have representatives from MU-NCORP here today, NCI. Now is the time to relaxation items. Life is heck, turnover, staffing, not enough money coming in, usual things.
Well, one of the things that we've heard a lot about, and we continue to hear a lot about, is staff turnover. And I think a lot of us thought that as we're here, not everybody's wearing masks, right? Like the world is slowly sort of changing back, that maybe there would be less of it. But I don't know if we're seeing that. I know a lot of people have come up to me and say turnover is just as bad as it was mid-COVID. And, we'd really like, every time we've had one of these meetings, we've gotten an idea just from listening to what kind of solutions people have come up with at their institution or what they're seeing has sparked an idea in our head. And so I don't know if any of you want to comment on anything that you're seeing at your sites that are that's changed. Otherwise, we'll call on you.
Hi, I'm Amy from Crown Consortium. So going back to, I know it's back to the money, but we continue to see staff come in, get a little experience, and then they get nabbed by pharma. That just continues to be a problem. They get paid more. We're limited with the resources we have, and we know that the NCI is limited, and it's not an easy fix, but that is a problem when we can't reimburse people the same level that they're getting paid at a pharma. So people just use it as a stepping stone. So you're constantly orienting people. So I know the sites are doing a lot to help with that, which is great, but it's almost like turning into a revolving door, which has been difficult.
Hi, Christina with Cancer Research for the Ozarks MU-NCORP. I would champion what she says. If my PI were here today, he would say that grants are static and life is dynamic. And it's very challenging that in the grants, we can't even put in like a cost of living increase to keep up with anything like that. Also, just as she said, not only to pharma, but in general, salaries are going up in order to deal with the competition. There's a lot of times when the rates we've been paying entry-level coordinators, they can make more folding shirts at Target now than they can doing the important work that we're asking them to do. So that's very hard to hang on to that staff. The other change I would say that we're seeing that was kind of surprised us is we're seeing a lot more staff change in our physicians. And that we didn't expect. We were all focused on the coordinators, on the research nurses, on that staff. Now what we're seeing, especially our smaller sites in the very rural areas, they're losing their oncologists and they're having a terrible time recruiting oncologists back in. They're surviving sometimes on locums and sometimes on mid-levels. So that's a change that we're concerned about.
So how have you adapted to this? Any suggestions for solutions that have worked for you yet, or ideas that you have used to adapt?
On the oncology staffing, I mean, one thing that we're doing is that sometimes they get locums that we know have been investigators at sites before. We've had staff that have been at our larger institutions that have stepped back from oncology, but they're working as a locum at other sites. So in those situations, sometimes we say, hey, we know you've got city training. We know that you have been registered before. Can we go ahead and roster you to that site so we can continue to see those patients on trial in the interim until they do get somebody that's permanent? So that's one option. We've really pushed for the APPs to be trained and registered so that they can continue to do visits that are appropriate within their scope. And in some situations, of course, they can still put patients on trial. They can be the investigator. So we're leaning heavily on that where we can. It's a little bit of a struggle just because those NPs and those PAs are feeling so overwhelmed because they've got so much on their plate when they're covering at a site that's dealing with locums and others. Sometimes the radiation oncologist is the only one that's a true investigator, at the site at that time. So it's hard to get them to commit that time to do the training and to step up to that new role. But that's essentially what we're using to try to bridge.
Thank you.
I didn't know, Kate, if you can comment on the APP, some of the changes to the APP and with some of the changes to the regulation. You can go for whatever.
Kamara with Upstate Carolina MU-NCORP. And so talking and exactly what Amy was saying, we have a lot of staff coming and going. They're getting nabbed by pharma as well. And traditionally, our site had mostly RNs. So what we've done is gone outside that box and hired people with different types of degrees, and they've been doing great, but the onboarding is a little bit more, a little longer regarding if they don't have any clinical or medical terminology experience. But pharma still grabs them. So love to have a solution.
So for which positions, like CRA kind of
yeah,
work, or?
research coordinators. So our site traditionally had only RN coordinators. And we created a job description that you can have an RN, you can have a bachelor's, you can have your master's in health administration and still have an opportunity to coordinate trials. And it's opened up the field as far as clinical research, interests. But I think trying to level the playing field with what we can pay would be really helpful. And I always think about, I ask for market adjustments regularly at our site, and it's hard to really, I think maybe even our human resources might have trouble trying to figure out what that looks like. So that's.
Can I ask you a question? How do you train and integrate these people who have clearly, a high level of preceding education, but don't have medical education of any sort?
I mean, we have them shadow, we have them by people's side that have been there for a while. I will say our particular site, we lost a lot of like intellectual capital over the last few years where we had people retiring that have been in the business for a long time. And I've worked at other sites, an academic site where that was the typical model where you didn't have RNs. So I think it's really just hiring sharp people that are willing to take the dive and read in that protocol and know what to do. But the onboarding is long, at least 2 years.
2 years.
Really, to really be comfortable.
Before you let them function independently. What's the 2 year on that?
No, I would say 2 years when they're really comfortable. And I would say probably a year that they are comfortable with navigating protocols and getting patients on trial. So we have a big support system, but yeah. Thank you.
Interesting.
Fascinating.
Yeah, somebody online talked about that they have a laddering system for CRA similar to nursing, and that like knowing the pathway up has been successful because like people have a better sense of what their advancement may look like. And then I'm just guessing because they didn't go into all of this, but then it gives people like maybe a little bit of motivation to stay if they know, what the future might look like if they do stay.
I want to go back to the APP, and this is something that one of our sites is struggling with, and we're thankful that like with the NCORP studies, there's so much flexibility that they can contribute to. We're trying to understand why there's so much restriction from an NCI level on what they can do in treatment studies. Because if you open a pharma study, an APP potentially could like sign off on eligibility if it was delegated by the physician, dependent on what local institution has and state rules. Like there's certain things that are other layers, but right now there's a level at NCI saying you can't do this. And it's restricting certain locations that want their APPs there that are they would be okay with that and comfortable with it. So that would help with enrollment if they were able to engage more, because we are getting more and more APPs in instead of MDs. So your turn, Kate.
So Amy, you've done a terrific job you brought this up to the SWOG team. And so this was brought up the other day. I want to give kudos to SWOG. It bothers me to see on my back here. I want to give kudos to SWOG for the terrific job they have done for really leading the efforts across all of the research bases and NCTNs regarding APPs. Jamie Myers and Krista boarded the plate. There you are. Great. So you guys can jump in here, but I think this was brought up the other day. And we are going to take it back. Marge Good, who's probably online, and I will take this back to talk with our colleagues at NCI and look at what opportunities we might have, just like when we learned that the co-signing orders was an issue. And, we looked at also in 2021, how we can potentially change what the scope is for APPs, and we changed our MU-NCORP guidelines. We will look at this and certainly bring forward, but thank you for bringing it forward to SWOG because it was brought up in the task force the other day. So.
Yes, and Marge also said that you'll be talking to CTEP.
Yes. It's only 9 at night at her house.
Hi, I'm Yvonne from the Pacific MU-NCORP. One of the things that we haven't really talked about that's been discouraging for a lot of institutions, I think I've heard, is that mine included, we will have now had by October 1, all 4 research bases have audited us. We were decimated like everybody else during COVID. And we have new people that are looking at those studies for the very first time, who've never looked at a study, who've never been through an audit. And the audits have actually we haven't had our SWOG audit yet. They've been pretty brutal. And a lot of the sites, the coordinators have said, I don't need this. I was just trying to do this. And I don't want to do this anymore. I was doing my very best. So I'm hopeful that maybe the groups would consider a little bit of grace during this time when we're trying to educate staff, bring them up to speed, and to try to retain them. We do have a ladder at my institution. We have research coordinator 1, 2, 3, but we start people because we can't find those people. We're starting them as research assistants, and we teach them how to build kits, and we teach them how to read a protocol. We teach them about our systems. We introduce them to a vocabulary. And then as they start to learn our systems, then we move them up to be a research coordinator 1, where often they start on research-based trials. And we try to focus them on that versus, some of the other things, but it's tough. It's a tough market out there. We've had openings for research coordinator 2s and 3s for the last 3 years, and we can't fill them. So thank you.
That's really an excellent point. And one thing I have to ask you all is, well, one, I think in all of our interactions with everybody that we that we have to face, we have to be kind, because I think, you get further with a carrot than a stick, and that like the idea that an audit should be anything other than educational is just wrong. And so, it's a learning experience. We have to have faith that we're all professionals and we want to do a better job, a good job, and we want to learn from these experiences, not make people feel, like failures. And so one thing you said is that also struck me is you have potentially 4 audits in 1 year or more. And like, is there any way we can coordinate with the other groups to ensure that it's a lot of effort on the research-based side too, and that maybe these audits could be done by one group and that everybody can share that experience, and maybe they're auditing not just alliance trials, but also, SWOG trials, so that it's, that it's less fractionated and more like cohesive, for lack of a better word. I don't know if there's a way to do it, but we could at least, I wonder if there's a way we could address that.
Yeah, so that would have to be the senior.
Yeah, that at a high level. Yeah.
coordinator in this. Well, I'll just, sorry, go ahead.
And I just wanted to elaborate a little bit more about the audits, because our experience is that the different groups don't necessarily have the same, at least informal criteria. Maybe formally there's certain, criteria, and that can be very confusing too, and kind of surprising. And they don't behave the same way in terms of, looking at different. One group might even be a minor, and something else would be a really, really serious major.
Right.
We have experienced that. I just want to say one quick thing. I think that as we get more pragmatic trials, that especially for the earlier CRAs or CRCs, they can work on those, and I think they can probably be more satisfied, feel more, they're doing, a good job. And maybe their job satisfaction, just in general, those kind of trials, if it's less of a burden, and if the sites can do, a lot of the work to take some of the pressure on, because there's just so much work, and we're really understaffed. We're understaffed because of the lack of training. Even if you fully staffed, like in Hawaii, right now we only have 2 people who have been with us 3 years, and we have like 17 people doing different kinds of things. Yeah. And so it's the average life expectancy, so to speak, is like less than a year. And one of the things we're trying to do is to hire people that actually have some other kind of career to come in, because in the past we've had a lot of really bright college students who want to go to medical school and buff their CV. Those are the only people we've had, and they all leave after sometimes 9 months. It's sort of a disaster. So thank you.
Yeah. Good points. There are a couple comments on, from Marge about that auditing frequency is a topic that's good to know about, that she's also going to bring back to CTMB, because there are higher level ways of trying to coordinate that. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, because she said that there may be ways of encouraging collaborative audits. So really good point. And then another point that was brought up by Samantha Wright is having the NCORP CRAs involved in the development and review of protocols is really key to making the trials more friendly. And one of the things we've brought up is that often that there's a lot of involvement or questions at the concept phase where it's like super loose and like, would you approve or open this trial? But the devil's in the detail. And then something happens between when the concept's approved and the protocol gets written that makes, what was a doable protocol or, doable study to being a non-doable study. And so really making sure that there's involvement at all of the different stages of protocol development, I think is key.
So thanks. So Jeremy Kilburn from MU-NCORP. So as you were commenting on that, as an investigator, we're seeing kind of less diversity in what we put forth our energy into, just as you commented that if there is complexity in the trials, we don't have the bandwidth to look at those trials. So, larger trials, treatment trials are getting a little bit more focus, or kind of a select group of cancer control trials or CCDR. So I would argue kind of the diversity has probably suffered. And then there's some investigator fatigue with what we've asked of our investigators to at one point hold off on all accruals for maybe close to 2 years ago. We had to hold off for a better part of 6 months or more. And I think a lot of groups had to do that. And then we're on our group calls where, well, why are accruals slow? It's like, well, stop everything.
Right. Right.
And then there's a lot of ramp up period. And then there's some investigators who are saying, well, do we want to put energy into a new trial if we may only get 1 or 2 patients? And those are the trials that we unfortunately are going to have to pass on temporarily.
Right.
So, and then how long will it take before we get back to that diversity that we hope for?
Can I just ask, because a couple people email me this question not infrequently, and we're like reviewing protocols to try to simplify them. Sometimes people say, oh, we shouldn't add patient-reported outcomes because it will make the sites not want to open a study. And I don't know, I'm totally biased, but I'm like, well, I think it's like not having a broad enough patient population that's like a bit, having these super select, you have to screen a lot of patients to get one patient on, and a lot of blood and tissue and imaging that poses more of a barrier than asking a patient to fill out a PRO. But they're all different components of complexity. And I don't know if anybody's willing to comment on what the key components are that make a study, when you're thinking like of a go, no go, should I open this study, what the factors are that you look at.
Phil, I don't know if Dr. Lammers, who's research director at MU-NCORP, might have some. You want to share some?
Go ahead. So I think we really have to heavily rely on our research associates and team to get into the nitty-gritty of how complicated it will be. And that's why it does take us a little longer to open trials. So I think you got to put that focus in early. But when we review all the trials that are activated through CTSU every month, and try to put some focus on whether or not we could accrue. And I think having that total number, are we accruing 3 to 5 patients, is one we might see a couple times a year. Are the eligibility something that's going to be a barrier for us? But I would compliment changes that have been made over the last 3 to 5 years, that trials have definitely, they've heard that. And Pragmatica is a perfect example of the direction that we're moving. So I think I would compliment that. That's a change that I've seen, so that is not as traditionally challenging when we review new trials. But I would say how commonly we're seeing those patients. And unfortunately, again, we need to put our energy into trials that are going to be bigger hitters.
I completely agree with what he's saying. And like at our institution, we only have one regulatory person, even though we have, so that's the regulatory burden. And I think that a lot of the therapeutic trials are really rare disease trials. And that is a real problem. Like in Hawaii, if we have some kind of exon skipping, whatever trial, there may be one person every other year. And yet we'd like to open it, but how can we? Even combo matchups, we approved the umbrella, and I'm looking at the trials coming out like, are we ever going to see any of these people? So one of the things that I was wondering about, I've heard that SWOG is working on this, maybe you can comment, is to figure out some way that you can have a just-in-time type of activation. Maybe you can look at it preliminarily, and then it's not going to be actually have to go through your regulatory, especially if it's a SERV trial, it could go in very quickly.
Right.
And maybe that would be a sort of a salvation for some of these rare trials, but you'd still have to do some work on it ahead of time, but you wouldn't have to do everything, and you wouldn't have to carry it. And like, we're an NCI designated center, like you are. So we are looked at for a rare accrual. Theoretically, Henry, you send a letter out saying, oh, it's fine, you can have these trials, but the reviewers come in and they're like, oh no, our EAC is, why do you have all these trials? Half of them now are rare trials. So that's another issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for, really very well articulating that issue, because that is an issue for a lot of sites. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I was going to kind of talk about that same issue as well. We participate in a just-in-time network with a pharma group, and it works pretty well. We can get a study open in 3 or 4 weeks for a patient when we identify. So we're actually looking to see, can we do the same thing for combo match and some of these other things? But your initial question regarding, what do you look for in the protocol? I think it's like others have said, you've got to have the whole team look at the protocol, the CRAs who are on the ground doing the work. And in terms of patient reported outcomes, I don't think that's a huge hindrance, but sometimes there's like 4 or 5 surveys that go along with it. If it could just be one, it'd be a lot better.
Right.
Or if does it have to be every cycle they get treatment, or can it be every 6 months, or anything that you can do to lessen those intervals or lessen the work, I think is important. And same thing, of course, with imaging and blood collection and tissue collection and those sorts of things. So, we're excited to see Pragmatica, but, we reviewed a whole bunch of other studies that are opening up soon in the breast committee, and none of them look like Pragmatica.
No, I know. And I think that maybe the committee leadership needs to hear that, because, like, for example, there was one breast trial that was perfect for a pragmatic approach, like to get rid of all the PROs and the blood and the this and the that. I was like, open up the eligibility. You don't need to look at you could just look at overall survival, and there's like this resistance, they think it's not going to get reviewed well by the steering committee, like if they don't throw in all of this like esoteric stuff. So I think maybe, I don't know, maybe it's an alignment or discussion with the steering committees as well.
So these a lot of these issues are on the treatment.
Yeah.
And things like the just-in-time, I think, and especially when you have your new hat on, this needs to be raised with management. Because, we don't make the rules for the treatment trials. I know there's been discussion of just-in-time. And when we have Milo match and I match and combo match, there's no way but to do it that way.
So I know Jim Dorshow is working internally to try to simplify.
That's what's not computing with me,
Right.
We have this committee from CTAC on simplifying trials, and then the pendulum on the trial writers has gone all the way back to where I came in the 90s of doing bone scans and this scan and that scan and the other, when you say, especially in a disease like breast cancer, you kind of know.
Right.
And so I this needs to start coming up on the monthly NCTN leadership calls.
Yeah, so that everybody's on the same page, like we see it with R01s, right? So people put in all of this complexity, but so that they'll be innovative, and then like it, then it becomes like not really doable, right? So
same discussions with specimen collections, and went from you need a hypothesis to justify collecting to how could you not collect specimens on all these valuable people,
right,
to now we're kind of back to, well, what's your hypothesis?
Right.
It's expensive to collect, it's expensive to store.
And then they're underutilized.
Not used, yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So
So is the steering committees a level to target? Because, some of it, quite frankly, is defensive.
it's defensive.
Right.
So I just need to put in protocols that don't have all, I mean, they got the message about simplicity.
Right. Well, I mean,
Sheila, who runs the steering committee, also is the head of this innovative trials unit.
right.
So I think there needs to be a meeting of the mind.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Yeah, so I agree with everything everybody has said. The other area that we have really been decimated is in the data coordinators, which are really entry-level positions. So would just urge to, when you're creating your trial, is making sure that, because it's not just about enrollment, right? It's the ongoing data, like even after patients complete treatment or whatever. So I think that that's another area of concern.
Can I
So
just-
one of the,
Sorry, go ahead.
one of the things that came online also was about EPROs. Like, we're like, oh, it'll be easy. We'll just add EPROs. But, they don't, it's like in many ways, just handing somebody a form while they're sitting in the chair getting their infusions a lot easier from a data quality perspective. We know that to be true. Like, I have a study at my institution and half the time is spent like somebody trying to ping, somebody to fill out some questionnaire at home. Whereas if they came in, we can just give it to them. And so some of the things that we institute that we think are going to make it easier, sometimes make it harder. And so we do need to recognize that.
Yeah, so I'll just say two things as we try to wrap up here. One is an ongoing plea for simplification. Just let's do everything we can to keep things simple. ASCO, Friends of Cancer Research, FDA, we went through multiple cycles of simplifying clinical trials eligibility criteria. Okay, did a lot of work. Some of that has been validated. Basically, you can increase enrollment at no harm to patients by de-intensifying some of these things. So the people who design these clinical trials, in the long committee, I find myself constantly asking, why is this necessary? Why do we have to do this? It's like we're just genetically engineered to complicate things, So I think we've got to hold ourselves accountable as the designers of these trials. Because what we do, there are downstream consequences. You set people up to fail in the field, right? And then the flip side of that is the discussion about audits. I think audits are welcome. Audits are welcome. The thing about audits is that they help you understand how you're doing so you can get better. The only problem arises when we get defensive or offensive about audits. We're all human. We will err, no doubt. What we just don't need is to cudgel people because of an error. Within reason, of course. You don't want people going around doing crazy stuff. So some of that about the audits goes back, I think, to us in our institutions and our culture, right? If we understand that audits truly are welcome and they help, and yes, we will err, okay? Accept the majors and minors, make a good faith effort to get better. And let's not fight each other about imperfection, right? I think, we will do well.
And I really strongly encourage you all, while you're sitting in those, sometimes I'm in those committees and people say, oh, does anybody have any problem with this protocol? And there's like silence, like there was here until we got you all to start talking. Don't be shy, because that's the opportunity to sometimes it's not so comfortable because you don't want to be critical, but at the same time, sometimes the investigators need to hear, like we were in one of, I don't know, remember if it was CCD or, and somebody said, what, if you include, for that particular study, if you include caregiver payer dyads, we won't open the trial. It's like, oh, and then everybody said, yes, it's impossible. So it's like, okay, let's go back and try not to do, let's make those designs more flexible. And it's important for us to hear, but it's also important for the NCI and the people that are writing the RFAs to hear too, that like what works and what doesn't. With that.
All right. Well, thank you all for the wonderful work you do at
Okay.
home. Thank you. And thank you to our colleagues online.
Yes.